morning. So we're just continuing our theme here, Heaven on Earth, with our topic today, something about own your individuality. I know what it is. Own your individuality. Last week it was really fun, and I hope you got to practice it throughout the week, of just blessing everybody. Anything that you were praying for one person, you were praying for everybody. And just to feel the joy and the exuberance and the abundance of blessing everybody with goodness and wealth and joy and everything. And as I mentioned in the email newsletter, for those of you who get it this past week, sometimes we get so in joy and an exuberance over everybody's good and blessing everybody that we can sometimes lose ourselves. So that thus own our own individuality. There's a great quote by Albert Camus. To know oneself, one should assert oneself. I thought that was really good. I just happened to read it this past week, and I'm like, oh, that's it. That's what individuality is. Individuality doesn't just sort of lose itself in the crowd. It asserts itself. And sometimes by asserting ourselves, I don't know if you've had this experience, we don't even really know what we're thinking sometimes. We come out and we're like, and we see other people's reactions. We start to learn more about who we are by how we talk, by the things that we say and the things that we act, in a way that we can't know if we're just sort of staying within our own interior world, keeping everything inwardly. And I also love, as Ernest Holmes always does, in his reading today, thank you, Michelle, about not just knowing our own uniqueness, but being able to also celebrate everyone else's genius, everyone else's uniqueness. So what we have then is a world full of uniqueness, and underneath is the oneness. Now, what can happen sometimes in spiritual communities is that we get really clear about our oneness, and that what oneness is, the ever-present oneness, is infinite oceanic love. It is peace that passes human understanding. It is kindness. It is generosity. It is goodness. And so then we feel that we need to start acting. If I'm made in the image and likeness of love, of peace, of joy, then my speech and my actions need to be in alignment with that. And sometimes that can dull our individuality. I think of, and I'm giving an example of one person right now, but actually this happens quite frequently. So I'm using this one person as an example, but it just see, is there any part of me that feels sometimes like this? So she was a journalist in the 60s, and a very prominent journalist for a woman. She was a feminist. People really liked her. I think she wrote for the New Yorker magazine, and a very witty, quick with her comebacks, and just interesting, different perspectives. And then somewhere along the way, in the 60s, she started going on a spiritual journey. And her editor said, a lot of us in the journalistic field were really sad because it was suddenly like this glaze came over her. She was very nice and very friendly and very warm, but that individual, unique self stopped asserting itself. And now she was deeply spiritual and kind and good. And what's interesting, I do that face because there was this woman, she used to be a nun in a sort of Hindu organization, and where I used to go visit. And I laughed so hard because it's what I saw, and I didn't know it was actually prescribed. That she said, "Oh yeah, we had a certain way we were supposed to walk, and we would walk, and then if you see someone, you just turn your head a little to the side and go." I'm like, "Oh my gosh, they did that all the time. I didn't know it was like a rule." Anyways, so. But this woman is a legitimate spiritual teacher. I know one of her students, and her student was talking about just the amazing mystical experiences that she's had with this spiritual teacher. That she is a spiritual teacher in the Hindu lineage where authentic, real spiritual experiences are happening of extraordinary light and extraordinary beauty. So that was real. She wasn't phony in that spiritual being. She wasn't just putting on a face. But at the same time, there's all this other part of her that was getting submerged, and that also has had negative impact throughout. So within these decades, since the 60s, there's been this beautiful spiritual light that has given many gifts, but underneath there's also been, she's perpetuated a lot of pain for people and for for students. And and doesn't acknowledge that part of who she is and of the spiritual journey, that the shadow side. And I'm not saying that our individuality is shadow, but sometimes we try to be so spiritual. We are spiritual, but we do it to the denial of our humanity. And I've discovered that's one of the reasons why I love stories, whether it's in movies or novels. I tend to read novels less only because they take a lot more time, investment of time, where movies are only a 2-hour investment of time. But I like stories because they show nuances of relationships, of people. And I was just watching this story called The Painted Veil. Has anyone heard of The Painted Veil? Yeah, it's based on a Somerset Maugham novel. And it was beautiful because these two people used each other. Well, he definitely fell in love with her. He was a doctor, mostly researcher, though. Sort of inward, very intellectual and analytical. He fell in love with this socialite girl. She wanted to get away from mom, so she marries him. And they try to make it work at the very beginning, but it's clear they have nothing in common, these two. And so she ends up having an affair with someone who's far more her, like, socialite in her world, and she's in love with him, but her husband finds out, and the other guy doesn't want to marry her. So in order to prevent scandal, he's angry. And he said, well, instead of creating a scandal by a divorce, why don't you come with me? There's a cholera outbreak in a small village in China. Well, let's go there. He's a happy guy. So they go to the small village. They're already they'd gone to China, but in Shanghai. But this was a small village. Hardly anyone speaks English but these nuns. And they're sort of stuck with each other now. He's really fuming because she cheated on him and didn't love him. And what he later says is he was just really angry with himself for falling in love with somebody who was so completely different than him, that he let himself fall in love with her. And so they're in this very contained world, and it's beautiful because she begins to see who he really is. She sees his kindness as he's working with the orphan children, and how he's really working on healing, trying to get rid of cholera in this little village. And the best moment in the movie, in the story, I haven't read the book, so I don't know if this is in alignment with the book or not, is when they're sitting there talking with each other. And he was saying something. They're now more at peace. It's been a long time. They're getting to know each other. No, never once, at least in the movie, did they express love for one another, but you could see it growing. You could see it growing in their eyes and the way they started treating one another. And he says, you're right, I knew that you were nothing like me, and I married you anyway. And I was mad at you for not being the way I wanted you to be, and vice versa. She knew he wasn't who she wanted him to be, but married him anyway, and then was mad at him for not being who she wanted him to be. And they laughed. They didn't laugh. They weren't really laughing type people, but smiled. Big smile. And you could just feel that they just, in that moment, completely accepted one another. They weren't expecting them to be different anymore. We talk about that suffering as we have the ideal, and then the actual, and the suffering is the gap in between. Well, I think sometimes on our spiritual journey, our ideal is so high, and our actual is so much less than that we suffer in that gap in between. We like, I should always act this way. I should always speak this way. I should always be vibrating. And then we don't accept our humanity. And I think the reason why I feel relief when I watch a story or a movie, it's like, I can just watch people who are being human. And for me, I feel more authentic love sometimes in those moments when people are just being who they are. No God is ever expressed, no spiritual language is ever expressed, and yet there is more authentic love there for just their full acceptance of that moment. And as an audience member, whether you're watching a movie or reading a book, we're seeing the bigger picture. So the two characters might be bumping up against one another, but we see the distance, and we can see all, like, she's that way and he's that way. And because we're not involved, we don't need to judge one is right and one is wrong. We accept that, he's a scientist and that's his personality, and she's a socialite, and neither one of them are wrong. They're in this situation, there's a condition in their life, and they're thrown together, and they're bumping up, and there's nothing wrong. And so we can witness it with compassion. in a way that sometimes I think we forget to do in our own lives, especially as we're on the spiritual journey. We forget to witness ourselves with compassion, that we're just human beings. So it's going to seem like I go off a little trail, but I'm not. It's going to circle around. I want to go into the issue of control. Ernest Holmes, the founder of this teaching, in one of he has I believe statements, or we believe, or I believe statements, and he says, I believe in the control of conditions. Now this came along, the idea was that we don't want to feel victim to the world around us. We are made in the image and likeness of God, and there's this power which he calls the law. In Hinduism, it's Shakti, or you might hear Chi, but it's everywhere. It's in, through, and as all creation. It's everywhere in this room right now. It's running through all of us, through the chairs, through the ceiling, through every person here. It's always there. It's in people in China, in Japan. There's no place where it's not. And this law is like one big field. And it's a field that's completely impersonal. It doesn't choose. It's just like a field that you plant seeds in. So whatever our thoughts are, and especially our dominant thoughts with the most emotion and habit pattern, gets put into this energy field constantly over and over. And when we do that, we see a manifestation. It grows our thoughts. Often when the way we talk about it is we think it's just externally, but it's internally as well. So if I start really thinking of myself and I want to be a better human being and using thoughts and emotions consistently over and over and over, then the patterns within me will start shifting into how I deem what a better human being might be. And so this is the essence and the empowering essence of our teaching, is that we don't have to be a victim to our own patterns or the patterns out there. Now, we can't choose all patterns. I just want to throw that out there. We don't control all conditions. Although he did say that, I don't think he really meant that. We are not creating the weather. I, Harriet, did not create the weather that I am in. I didn't create the tax system. Clearly. But I'm part of it. Joel Goldsmith, who was really mostly known for doing an extraordinary amount of spiritual healing with people who were physically ill, said he had never met a person whose thoughts were ugly enough to create cancer, that cancer was a pretty devastating disease. He said simply by being a human, by being in this world of duality and participating in a world of duality, which we all are, if we are on this earth, we are participating in duality, we are subject to the consequences of duality. And until we are not just individually, but as an entire planet operating from a place of oneness, which would look very different, if we're vibrating solely from oneness, then we are all free of duality. But until that happens, we are in relationship with one another in duality. But as individuals, even though I can control some conditions, I can create some things in my own life, but I always have 100% control over my response to things. So I can't control the weather, but I can control how I respond to the weather. I can make choices about how I want to see it, how I want to interpret what is happening in my life, and how I choose to see that will impact how I experience it and my relationships around me. And that's incredibly vitalizing and energizing and empowering, that I have 100% control over my responses to everything in my life, how I choose to respond. I'm for that. But I just want to talk one little aspect of that, about the control. There can also be a subtle aspect of that, which is I also want to control who I am because I don't like who I am. So I want to change things about myself because I'm rejecting things about myself. I'm rejecting my individuality. That when I assert myself, sometimes it feels funny because other people are different, or I feel different than them. I can't tell you how many times I've heard people say, I'm a little bit different than everyone in this community. I hear ministers say it all the time. I mean, we're all in the same teaching, but, well, I'm different than everybody. Like, yeah, we all are really different than everybody else. Like there's no one thing. And I think in our mind, we think, well, it's all of them. They're all together and they all agree and are alike and I'm over here and I'm different. But if we really feel our individuality, if we are asserting our individuality, we all feel a little bit different than everybody else in the room. And that's good. And I think that's the part to say, can I accept who I am? Can I accept my differences? So it's one of those things where I love Shunryu Suzuki's statement, you're all perfect as you are, but you could stand a little improvement. That's in essence what I'm saying. Like, I'm always going to be working on myself. I'm never going to stop trying to improve aspects of myself, but I don't want it to be at the expense of, at the other side of that, as I don't like those parts that I'm trying to change. I want to fully accept who I am and appreciate who I am, and then the work on myself comes from that always already acceptance of who I am. You know, one of the things that I recognized that I didn't like about being a minister was it made me more visible. And so, yeah, it made my strengths more visible, but also made my weaknesses a lot more visible. And that made me really uncomfortable because I'm very aware of all my limitations. Oh, I said the wrong thing. I did the wrong thing again, and again. And finally, I just came to like, I want people to like me. And I can't always, the more visible we are, the more we assert ourselves, we get to see our all aspect. You know, to me, I just looked at you and I thought of it. It's about being an artist, a spiritual artist. I love, one teacher said, when you go to therapy, it's like to cure, but artists don't cure, they turn everything into beauty. You use the shades, the dark and the light, and all the colors. You don't try to fix the dark. You don't try to fix the various shades. You bring the beauty. You use them to bring out the beauty of life. Just talking to Jack this morning, all this cloudy weather. This cloudy weather, we haven't had cloudy weather in like 4 years. It's been like sunny for 4 years. And I thought, wow, I'm really going to appreciate the sun again. And I thought, I'm going to feel it more. I'm going to be more conscious of it, that the shade is actually heightening my love of the light. And what a beautiful gift that is. And so I give thanks for the clouds because I know it's going to be just beautiful when the sun comes out. And I'm going to feel it. I'm going to be more conscious of it. So what we want to be are spiritual artists with ourselves, to just say, I'm not here to make everyone feel comfortable, that we are going to bump up and hit one another in a community, a spiritual community. An authentic spiritual community is not about everybody always getting along nicely, because then we're not being authentic. Then we're just doing the surface thing. That if we are unique selves, just like in any story, in any our lives, family, work, we bump. We hit. The question is do I then go back and beat myself up about it, or do I beat up the other person about it because I think we shouldn't be hitting? See, that's what happens. It's the ideal. Oh, we should always be loving and we shouldn't have this conflict. What if we turn it around? I'm like, of course we have a conflict. Of course we're going to have bump up with each other. Of course we're going to make each other uncomfortable. And that's okay, because underneath it there's this presence and power working with us, and I'm willing to work with that energy. I'm willing to bump into people with the understanding that we're all working towards something higher, deeper, higher, wider, greater, transcendent. That we're all on this journey to go deeper than the conflict. Just like you do when you're watching a story, that you can see the conflict, but as the watcher, as the witness, you can see something so much bigger happening that the two characters can't see. And that's what we want to be in our life, is to own our own individuality, to feel into ourself and to embrace all of ourself, even that part of me that's a little edgy, that might get annoyed with somebody. Embrace that part of me. And I want to even go a step further. Delight in it. When I was at Agape, we would just sit in our office and we would just think about the staff and we would just laugh. We were just like, we should be a half-hour sitcom. We have like the most crazy personalities in this room or in this office. And what if we seriously started thinking about it, and we just started, even ourselves, just going off on how these different characters. And we can delight in our craziness and our quirkiness. I was thinking of Winnie the Pooh. You know, they have Winnie the Pooh's like the easygoing dude. Then you have Piglet, who's always worried, something bad. And then you had rabbit, busy, 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 rabbit, busy, busy. And then you had Eeyore, something terrible's going to happen. And I'll tell you, my mom was my greatest teacher on this. Because she, what? Tigger. What's Tigger's thing? He's bouncy, cheerful, like always enthusiastic. Yeah. That would be my mom. just constantly, what? Yeah, Tigger, right? So, just this constant cheerfulness, right? Tigger. But the funny thing about me, for me, I loved the Winnie Pooh cartoons when I was little, and I remember my mom would come in, and I always thought Eeyore was such a drag, everything's going to fall apart and everything. My mom would just laugh. She goes, I love Eeyore. He's my favorite. Look at him. And she thought he was hysterical, and I thought, how can she laugh at his misery? And he's bringing everybody else down, but it wasn't bringing her down. She was enjoying it, and that taught me, I don't need to take everything so seriously. Even my own darkness, I can laugh. Yeah, I have this darkness, and not take my limitations as a human being, and I always have to work on them, and I have to analyze them, and I have to fix them. I can just laugh at them. And that immediately takes that tension away around those things I don't like about myself or my limitations. Just enjoy ourselves. So to own our individuality is to really enjoy yourself, to enjoy who you are when you assert yourself, to speak up, to talk, to let people know what you're thinking, to not hide out because you're afraid you're going to bump. Be willing to bump. Be willing to make it a little uncomfortable. Be willing to enjoy connection, because what's also going to happen is for anyone who's in any long-term relationship, you have those bumps, but when you're willing to work through it, you go a little bit deeper and you become a little bit more intimate. It was just like in that movie when they had that moment of total acceptance. If they had tried that 5 years earlier, it would have been inauthentic, because they really didn't like each other at that point. So if they just tried to be nice, and we have movies about that where people are nice, but underneath, there's all that stuff going on. 5 years later, everything was out on the table. There was nothing hidden. All that pain, all the bumping, all the ways they had been hurting each other, it was all out. And that's when that moment of love comes. That's when the deepest, most authentic love comes, is after the bumps. If we are willing to stick and keep at it and work at it, resilience, to keep working and being with one another. Own our individuality. Your individuality is the greatest gift to this planet. The way you show up is the greatest gift to the planet, and you deprive all of us if you're not speaking up, if you're not giving your gifts, if you're not expressing yourself. That doesn't mean everyone's going to agree with you or like you. It doesn't matter. Ultimately, they will. They're going to be forced to. No, it's and that's where the joy is. That's why, to me, this is my favorite. It's sort of, just on a little side note, I was always jealous of, singers, or because they have the same song and they can practice it and sing it over and over and over. And I'm like, yeah, but when you're a minister, you have to come up with something new every single week. And that's hard. I'd rather just take one talk and just keep saying it over and over. And then I realize I am doing that. I do say, basically, we're saying the same thing over and over and over. And this thing about being our own individual self and being empowered and being who we are, that's sort of a recurrent theme. And I always love talking about it because it's the most energizing. It's the most freeing. If we could just accept who we are, how we show up in the world, accept it ourselves first. Don't look for other people to validate us. Find that validation within you, first and foremost. So when you've just asserted yourself, and then you go back into your car, or you're thinking, I could have said this, or I should have done that. Stop. It was fine. It wasn't perfect, but neither was the other person perfect. Just accept. Can you just accept how you showed up with all your limitations, with all the things you wish you had said, all the things you wish you had done differently? Just stop. Love yourself. So you might have been Eeyore for a moment. So you might have been Piglet for a moment. It doesn't matter. Enjoy it. Enjoy who you are, because I know I enjoy you. So this week, enjoy who you are. Assert yourself. Speak out. Let people know who you are. Be a spiritual artist. Well, that's why I'm saying the spiritual artistry, because it's not any one thing. So I absolutely think that we want to that's when the I'm perfect just the way I am, and I'm also trying to improve myself. I'm always wanting to become a greater vehicle of light, a greater expression of the divine eternal one. But sometimes our ideas of how that looks gets limited. So let's say I want to be do an affirmative treatment to be a more loving being. But then in my head, I might say, well, to be a more loving being, I have to go around and talk nicely to everybody. That's what a more loving being is, versus being honest. For some people, being completely, authentically honest is the most loving thing I can do. So we can limit. We don't ever have to worry about limiting spirit. So when we affirm, what we're affirming is to become more of who we are as individuals. But that may not. But who we are as individuals is going to be actually more unique. The more my feeling is it's a paradox. The more we affirm our oneness, actually, the more individuated we become. But we're not doing it with our mind, with our ego. It's coming through a spiritual essence. And sometimes we feel that uniqueness and it's uncomfortable, so we withdraw. So we affirm. Now that's an internal thing. Now in terms of affirming something like I want to have a better job or better health, that is, in essence, controlling a condition, but that's a little bit different. Like I said, it's the place from which it's coming. If I'm coming from a place of I'm not good enough, so I need to have a car to make myself be good enough, that's unhealthy. If I want another car as an expression of who I am, as a delighting in who I am, as a beautiful emanation of God. So do you see what I'm saying? It's more where I'm coming from in the affirmative prayer treatment than what I'm treating for. Am I coming from a place of wholeness and oneness, that this is whatever I'm affirming is something I want to express versus something I need to get to fix me? All right, we're going to pray.